As I have read history, I don't see any country that's ever gotten itself into America's situation and come out on top. It always leads, even if they come out on top, it's in a greatly weakened position.
Jim Rogers believes the U.S. is in decline, similar to how other powerful empires have weakened over time. He points out that since 1945, the U.S. has been involved in many wars, increasing its debts and weakening its position globally. He compares America's situation to the fall of the British Empire, noting that transitions like this often lead to instability. He worries about his children's future in this uncertain world, suggesting that Asia may become a more dominant region. He is concerned about the U.S. dollar, wars, and poor decision-making by U.S. leaders.
You say that the U.S. is stable, but since 1945, I think that was the date you used, America's often been at war, nearly always been at war with somebody. Which I'm an American taxpayer. I have to pay for all these wars. And America is now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And that's all happened since 1945. After the Second War, America came out of wonderful. We won the war. We had huge assets, not many debts, but that's all disappeared. And we have had several wars since 1945. I don't think we've won any of those wars since 1945. Maybe there have been some. Korea was, we say we won Korea, but other people say we didn't win Korea, etc. So I don't like what I see when I'm looking around the world. I mean, Alex, one good thing is I'm an old American. It's a good time to be an old American. It's not a good time to be a young American. Look at my children. Oh, my children are going to have the same kind of problems that the British had for many decades because they are young Americans, and America's facing that same situation, which is going to get worse. I mean, I don't know if Asia is going to be great in the next 100 years, but it seems to me it's going to be less bad than Britain, to pick a country at random, less bad than America, to pick another country at random. I don't like saying any of it, but I think I have to face reality and face facts and certainly try to predict what's going to happen in the future. Yes, the world, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, the U.S. was a gigantic creditor nation. Now we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And when Britain went through this, there was a lot of transition, instability, whatever you want to call it. And there's already starting to be some instability over the U.S. dollar and America's position. As I have read history, I don't see any country that's ever gotten itself into America's situation and come out on top. It always leads, even if they come out on top, it's in a greatly weakened position. The British won the Second World War, but they came out of that in a very, very weakened position, even though they say they won the war. So history is pretty clear that when countries go from being indisputably on top to something else, it causes turmoil and transition and difficulties. Again, I don't like saying any of this. I'm an American citizen. My children are Americans, but I don't see any alternative. My problem is I can add and I can subtract. I'm afraid the people in Washington cannot add and cannot subtract. And history is very clear how this winds up for the country that's going through the transition, as you call it. Transition's a good word. It usually does not lead to great outcomes in the end. But I repeat to you, I'm an old American, so it's not such a problem for me as it is for my children. The United States in 60 years, I see nothing but problems. I mean, you're both English. I can remember 60 years ago what happened in England as the pound sterling went from being the world's mightiest currency to being a disaster. I don't know if you remember those days, but
Absolutely.
that's going to happen to the U.S. dollar. I don't like saying that. I'm an American and I have American children, but I have to face facts. And I hope that I can prepare my children for their lifetime. And I don't see it as being France or Italy or most European countries. I see a lot of similarities now. If you read European history before the Second World War, there are a lot of similarities. Now, I'm not saying it's the same. I'm just saying there are similarities that worry me because the world often is at war with somebody. And I don't like what I see in Europe, especially compared to the First War or the Second World War. But I have to face facts. I have to put my money somewhere every day. I have to have it somewhere. And I certainly don't like what I see in Europe. Not today. I'm not saying that, oh my gosh, the Germans are going to invade France next week or anything like that. But I look back and see similarities. And I don't like the similarities. And if there's going to be more war in Europe or Russia or wherever, it's not going to be good for any of us unless we happen to pick the right country at the end of the war. And most of us are not that smart, including me. But what you left out is that it's bureaucrats in Washington who make these decisions in the end. And I don't have too much confidence in bureaucrats anywhere. And they make many mistakes. And if the U.S. bureaucrat decides next week that he doesn't like your tie, they're going to put sanctions on you, whether you deserve them or not. And it's going to be disruptive, certainly disruptive to you and to people you deal with. And that's a lot of the problem now, as I see it anyway, that Washington, especially Washington, has imposed sanctions on many, many countries in the last few years, and they continue to do that. I don't know of many cases in history where sanctions have been successful, except for the politicians who get their picture on the television or something. But most sanctions have not been a big success, except for a few politicians. So I would certainly prefer a world with more open markets, more open societies, more open countries. But unfortunately, that has not been the case in recent years. And I'm afraid, like in other periods in history, it's going to get worse and not better. It's always happened, Alex. All of a sudden, there's a war over here, which most of us don't pay attention to. We ignore. But then a few years later, that turns into another war. And the next thing you know, there are huge disruptions everywhere, whether it's sanctions or tariffs or whatever. So I repeat that I see some similarities to now and the period before the First World War and the Second World War. Mm-hmm. One possible difference is those wars were mainly in Europe. I don't see Europe going to war with each other anytime soon, although Ukraine is at war with a lot of its neighbors, and that's a European country, sort of. That's what's happening in Europe, that for like many times in history, people think things are great. And if there's a problem, don't worry. If we have a war, don't worry. The war will be over by Christmas. Can I tell you how many times in history the people have said the war will be over by Christmas? And they always get optimistic. There are many problems developing in Europe. Most of the nations in Europe now have huge debts, which was Germany, the idea that Germany would have huge debts was inconceivable when I went into the investment world. It's just something could not happen. But now even the Germans have a lot of debts and potential problems. So, as I look around Europe, I would love to find a safe haven. I don't know if there is one now. If you tell me a safe haven, then we will have to discuss their neighbors, because the neighbors are not a safe haven, and the neighbors can spill over and cause problems. I love Europe, but I have to be realistic. When I was young, Europe was a paragon. I mean, Germany, Switzerland, all these countries didn't have big debt. They didn't believe in money printing. The Swiss franc was as sound as it could be. But even now, the Swiss National Bank invests a lot of its money in things like Apple. I mean, when the world finds out that the Swiss franc is now backed by Apple instead of gold or integrity, I mean, it's some people are going to be worried. I am already worried when I see things like this happening. I mean, I cannot imagine that 40 or 50 years ago that the Swiss would have even thought about putting the Swiss franc all into Apple or something like that. You know, the debate, if there was a debate, was whether it would be gold, 100% gold, or just mostly gold. But now they don't think that way in Europe, most of Europe, nor the United States. So when I look out the window and I look west, I get worried. And you mentioned Malaysia. Yes, Malaysia, compared to even 30 years ago, is an incredibly different nation. But most of the countries in Asia are too now. Maybe we are witnessing a huge historic shift from the West to the East. I would like to repeat to you all, when I was at university, for instance, there was nothing sounder than the Deutschmark, except maybe the Swiss franc. But even today, as I look out the window, I don't see the Deutschmark being what it was, or the Swiss franc even being what it was. You know, Alex talks about Malaysia. I am not a wild fan of Malaysia, but it certainly continues to get better and better from the old days. And that's happening in much of Asia. Well, they're certainly losing it. I mean, I am an American citizen, and I certainly don't like to see what is happening. This whole thing in Ukraine. America, started this war 10 or 12 years ago. America, for some reason, has a history of often being at war. If you can contrast that with China, China has very rarely in its history had international wars. Yes, they've had civil wars where they shoot each other, but they have very rarely had international wars for whatever reason. And I wish I could say that about America. I wish I could say that about many countries. America's been a country since 1776, but in only 19 years, since 1776, has America not had a war. America's nearly always been at war in our history. And I contrast that with China. I'm not saying China's better or worse or anything else. I'm talking just about war here. So most countries in Asia do not have a long history of international wars. Let's hope that continues. And I mean, whether I'm right or wrong, I've moved to Asia and have my children speak Mandarin. And to prepare, I hope I'm preparing them for the 21st century. We will see. Maybe we should all move to Missouri, which is a U.S. state, and escape peace, but I doubt it.
Thank you for watching this deep dive into the shocking realities discussed by Jim Rogers. His insights on the future of the U.S. empire paint a challenging picture, highlighting the historical patterns and economic instabilities that may shape America's destiny. While the decline of empires is not new, preparing for the shifts ahead is crucial. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more expert analyses on global economies, shifting powers, and how to navigate uncertain times. Until next time, take care and stay informed.